Days ago, we talked about NFTs and transmedia storytelling being the basis of Web3, which is considered the new age of the internet. But before we had Web3, we had Web1 and Web2, and we are currently seeing the transition from Web2 to Web3. But why are we seeing this right now? What's going on in the world that is predicting this and being seen as evidence that this is true? And how can we learn from it? And most importantly, what does it mean for us? So what we talk about here on this channel, how can we look at the world around us, ask these questions, and incorporate that knowledge into our own lives so that we can live a more fulfilled and honest life that we want. Because every decision that someone else makes can affect your life, but the most important decisions that do affect your life are the ones that you get to make. Because every decision brings you closer to who you want to be or further away. So what did Web1 do for us? What is Web1? And as the name indicates, it is the first version of the web. It is when the first basis came out of what we understand the internet to be today. Web1 consists of the read-only web. So a web where you can only interact with it through reading already existing content or concepts. And a lot of the ways that the internet was created was based off of how people interacted already. Email came out and was one of the first things to come out through Yahoo. And even the name itself, email, is based off the idea of mail being something that you share with one person to another. And the idea of files existing on a computer, just as files existed in an office. So there is a lot of words that are the same as it once was in an office, just to make the transition easier for people to understand that they're not going to go and look through their mail for important information. They're going to go look through their email, the internet mail. So the ideas behind Web1 was really as a transition so that people could start to recognize this new media that they would soon interact with on a grand scale. So the internet really started to take form in the way that we know it today in the early 90s and up to the late 2000s. And the internet really was a place of hope and a place where people didn't have to be subjugated to their past or their current identity from being a person of a certain country. That was really the hope that a lot of people had for the internet back then, was to not see borders, to create a place where people could go to and interact without all of this superfluous information that really doesn't mean a whole lot for a majority of people. And at that time, this was coming right off the 70s and 80s, where there was a big movement in the world to stop seeing these divides. And the internet was created in a way so that people could connect and not see these borders. Because when you go and open the internet, it doesn't really matter which country you're from, as long as you have the internet connection and the Wi-Fi. So this was also the time where it really transitioned from being something really inaccessible that only companies that had a lot of money could access, to something that was able to be transitioned and trickled down to the average day person. So if you know anything about the computer, you might be able to say that computers used to exist over a large space and were really inaccessible to the average person. Computers really had their beginnings in the 1940s when Alan Turing came out with the Enigma machine. Well, the machine that broke Enigma, which was the German code that they used to communicate during World War II. And he had a hope that one day he would have a computer that he could give information from, or that he would have this machine that he could give information to and would be able to solve a great deal of problems. And the original computer is often referred to as the Turing's machine, the Turing system, based off of Alan Turing's and his work. So if you've ever seen The Imitation Game, that is where the original basis of computers comes from. So check that out. It's really fascinating movie, and really does allude to what hope a lot of people had for the computer, where people didn't see certain things about people, but just saw them as people, which was something that was a big part of Alan Turning's life. But that is really where the idea of a computer came to life. And throughout history, even further back, there is hopes that people had that someday a machine would be able to do all of this math very quickly for us. And even during the space race, if you ever watched Hidden Figures, the people who were doing all the math problems to make sure that people were able to get into space were called computers. So, and in that movie as well, at the end, you can see what a computer really looked like. It was a big machine that took up a lot of space that could only do a few things. So from there, in the 60s, 70s, we transitioned to the 90s, where the internet is something that is more accessible. And in the 70s is the first time that the personal computer came out, and where people really got to see what it looks like to be able to have something quick at your hands. So the 90s was the application of being able to use all of this knowledge that existed in the world. How can you create access to something if you don't have it in your own day-to-day? So the 90s was really where that took off, and the internet became this center point. And they also had to figure out quite a few things, including how is everyone going to be able to access this at the same time. So they had to figure out the back end and how to transform it into something that could be accessible to millions across the world. And if you interact with computers, you probably do it on a constant basis throughout your day, whether it's on your phone now or on a laptop or a TV. Technology is at your fingertips constantly. So that was really what Web1 was. It was the first introduction of not only the internet as we know it today, but the ability for it to be accessible to so many people at the same time. So with this hope that the internet was going to be this place of interaction of so many, a lot of the basis of Web2 came out of that hope. So Google was very much Web1, and then in the early 2000s when Google Earth came out, that was really the start of Web2, which is how can people use this in their daily life to connect and to learn about the world and to bypass a lot of the bridges that existed in the world today. And if you grew up with the internet, you probably don't know of a time where you didn't have GPS, where you couldn't just go and find a sale or find whatever you wanted. And that is what Web2 is all about, how to create this new world with content that other people are creating or able to get access to. So Web1 was the read-only web, where you could just interact on a very minimal basis, where you could send emails, where you could read articles, but you could not create anything for that. So what Web2 did was it became the read-write web. So now people could interact and write on the internet. They could ask the questions, they could find the answers, and people could contribute answers. So this was when YouTube started to come around, where Facebook and Instagram really took off, and Netflix was really in its prime. Netflix started in the 90s, and at the time was a very small competitor to the well-known Blockbuster. Blockbuster had a very different model that it ran its business, but Netflix came as a startup and really changed the game because they were able to predict what was going to happen next within the age of the internet. Now, 2007, Netflix was already on this verge of doing better, creating more, and they went all in on this new idea of the internet, which was the reason why they were the original streaming platform for movies and shows, and they changed the game. And we will talk about Netflix at a greater length because they came out with a very fun documentary called The Last Blockbuster, which is very poignant of the times where Netflix, which overtook Blockbuster, is streaming the documentary about the last one. and it's almost like a big slap in the face to what Blockbuster once was. But is Netflix going down the same rabbit hole, and is it facing the same future that Blockbuster did? Because Blockbuster didn't adapt to the times, and maybe this time around Netflix isn't doing it either. So we will talk about Netflix in an upcoming video, but that is an interesting transition from Web 2 to Web 3, that if these companies don't get smarter and shape up, they will be left behind. But Web 2, when it started, it changed the way people interacted with their world. Amazon was on the come up, Netflix was, Google Earth was, and there's this really fascinating documentary film called The $1 Billion Code, which talks about Google Earth being a code that was created by Vision, or TerraVision, and was taken by Google Earth. It's a very fascinating docudrama, and I will link all of the trailers to the videos that I've mentioned, or the movies that I've mentioned, documentaries that I've mentioned, down below, so you can catch the truth for yourself and kind of see the reality of what's going on. But Web 2 became this web where you could also create content and interact with it, but you did not necessarily own it, though you could make money off of it, which is basically how all of media was always structured. You could write a book, but you didn't own the full rights or the full copyright. And even if you did own the copyright, you didn't own the publishing and all of the parts that go into it. You didn't create the art for the book cover, most likely. So though you owned a ability to gain a royalty off of this, you don't get the full extent of the marketing value, because you aren't also creating the printing press that created these books. So you aren't owning the entirety of that project. But Web 2 allowed people to interact with one another through creating content. Now, Web 2 media includes Facebook and Instagram and YouTube and all of these things, but we're coming to a time where people feel oversaturated with social media. But it also feels like something that is just a part of our lives that will always be a part of our lives. But will it? Just like certain things went away after the internet came about, certain things about Web 2 will drop out, especially the part where people don't fully own their content. Now, does this mean that YouTube or any of these other platforms will just someday go away? Well, with TikTok potentially being banned, those questions aren't so far-fetched anymore. So TikTok being banned, could this mean that other platforms will also be banned? When will the censorship actually stop? And that is something that I mentioned before, which I will also create a video about all the documentaries that I watched 6-7 years ago that I can no longer find access to. Censorship is real, and YouTube and all these platforms gave us a space where we could actually see what was going on in the world. You can go on TikTok and actually see live footage from these various areas in the world that are under constant war and attack, and insight into a world that you would never see before. So Web 2 really bridged this gap between all of us around the world. You could be watching a Netflix show that somebody in Germany and Japan and in other parts of the world are also watching. So we're connected in this fascinating way where we are being brought closer together, but some people feel still far apart. But that is really up to interpretation. So Web 2 really solidified this idea that people could interact with their world on a completely different basis, and now have the opportunity to pick where they wanted to spend their time. On Amazon, they have Whole Foods, so you can get food delivered to your house, not just food that you get at a restaurant, but groceries. You can buy clothes online, so you don't have to spend your time going to a mall. And there are certain things that you still have to do in person, like go to a dentist, but even going to a doctor, depending on what you need, has been transitioned by telehealth. So we've been really able to use this internet in this dynamic way where there's so many parts of our lives that are improved upon, and therefore allows us the ability to choose where we want to spend our time after all. Because when Web 1 existed, people still had to go to the grocery store, people still had to go to the doctor for therapy or for other various things. You still had to go to the pharmacy to get the drugs that you needed. But now there are delivery services, there are ways to get it shipped directly to your house. You don't necessarily have to leave your house for any particular thing unless you want to. So unless you choose the experience of going to a grocery store or choose to buy your clothes in a store, those experiences no longer have to be tied to your day-to-day. So these utilities that you had to deal with are now disappeared. They are evaporated all of this time, so now there's so much more time that you can use. And even bills and things like that, you can all have it automatically withdraw from your account. So direct deposit, you don't have to bring your check to the bank. And if you do get a check nowadays, you can take a picture and have it sent that way, so you don't actually have to go to a bank anymore. And now other parts of Web3 are destabilizing the systems that we knew even more. So Web2 is really the first introduction of the destabilization of the world that we used to know for so many years. People can choose what experiences they want based off of having shortcuts to getting stuff and also seeing what other people are doing. Now, if you want to go to a country, you just type in that country's name and YouTube will show you tons of videos of people that go there and different food recommendations, and all of these things are easily accessible. Back in the 50s, if you wanted to go to another country, it was a huge capital investment and you probably didn't know how you were going to book anything. So you had to go through an agency and put up a lot of money, and you really had no idea what was going to be waiting for you on the other side. But now you can book translators, you can book your own hotels, everything is easily accessible on the internet, and that is partly due to Google Earth and Google and all these other platforms that have allowed people to share about their own lives. So the read-write web has allowed us to share and to make life a lot easier. So how can there be a downfall of this? Excuse me. Well, that is what Web3 is asking of us. And how can we move through it? How can we overcome it? Well, that is what is in tune for us in Web3. So I am working on finishing this book, and I will talk in greater detail about Web3, but that is what Web1 and Web2 have done for us. They've created this foundation, and Web3 will capitalize on what both of these have done and hopefully learn from all the mistakes of those. So stay tuned for Web3 and this book to be the next big thing, and also the video that will come out for it. So let me know down below what you think of Web1 and Web2. How has it changed your life? What experiences do you choose to engage with now? And if you are still apprehensive about either of those, Web3 is coming. So hopefully we will all have a better understanding of what Web3 is very soon. I hope you have an amazing week, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks, bye.